Directors are no strangers to volatility. But how can boards learn to separate signals from noise as the economic playbook they've relied on for years is rewritten? Welcome to BoardVision, the official podcast of the NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors. We share perspectives from leading corporate directors and explore what makes boards effective, including how they can help companies prepare for the future. In this episode, Yolanda Daniel, a director on the boards of Leslie's and Valtir, and Dana Peterson, chief economist at the Conference Board, talk with NACD Vice President of Strategic Engagement, Marcel Bucsescu. Together, they discuss the forces reshaping the economy. They also explore the economic indicators directors should be watching, how boards can work with management to evaluate risk and opportunity, and what drives sound capital allocation decisions in an uncertain environment.
Have you heard about the benefits of NACD's certification program? Today's boards operate in a dynamic and rapidly evolving world. The National Association of Corporate Directors provides directorship certification that sets the standard for high-impact board directors. It's more than certification. This is the premier program, preparing directors to successfully navigate an increasingly complex business and governance landscape. NACD's directorship certification will enable you to demonstrate commitment, deliver confidently, and create real value for your organization. Learn more and apply today at nacdonline.org. And now, your host.
Yolanda and Dana, I'm so pleased to have you with us today on BoardVision podcast. We're going to tackle a pretty big topic, right? One of the key roles that boards play, along with selecting the CEO, setting compensation, et cetera, is really helping organizations navigate the environment in which they are living. And that's tricky. You know, we've come off of almost a generation of low interest rates and low inflation, and things felt good and, dare I say, easy almost. And now we're in this different environment with all of the challenges that businesses face and individuals face. And I hope in today's conversation, we're going to help make sense of some of that. So, Yolanda, if I can, I'd like to start with you. In your role as a director in that chair, how do you think about economic uncertainty and market volatility, and how does that impact the boardroom?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to you, Marcel, and NACD for inviting me to speak to you today. And in regards to your question, I think of as in a role as board director, there's a governance framework in which you think about. And there are internal factors as well as external factors. And certainly the economy is part of that factoring when you think about, for instance, your customers or suppliers, and understanding how that impacts your strategy. You have to consider risk factors in achievement of your plan. So the economy is certainly a very large consideration that you have to understand as you think about both short-term and long-term achievement.
Thanks. That's a great framing from that inside the boardroom perspective. Dana, if I can bring you into the conversation now, really from that broader outside perspective, so to speak. You're the chief economist at the Conference Board, which has a long and rich and very important history in the space. Wondering if you can reflect back on that history and where we are now. We talk about the turbulence and the disruption and everything in this environment, but, how is today's environment perhaps distinctive and different than past historical cycles we've been through and seen? I mean, how, as an economist, looking at the world today and helping business leaders navigate this, do you think about this?
Absolutely. And I think the distinction is that we have these concurrent and converging structural changes. I can list about 5 or 6 of these structural changes. So one is definitely demographics, where we have all over the world shrinking workforces due to aging, and that's resulting in labor shortages and massive migrations across regions. A second one is technological. We have AI, blockchain, crypto assets, quantum computing, and all of these things are being developed rapidly, more quickly, and then also being adopted. And you have winners and losers there, where some people are able to latch on to the new technology and others aren't. Another one is geopolitical. We're seeing deglobalization rather than globalization. We're seeing much more fracturing, a movement from multilateralism to protectionism. We're seeing a bipolar global economic order, whereas before it was either US versus Russia or US versus China. It's still US versus China, Russia, but now we have these new players that are reorienting because they have to figure out, well, how do we operate in this world where you don't have one or even two dominant powers, but many. And so you see economies like in the Middle East and India who are playing, burning the candle at both ends, trying to be friends with everyone such that they can move forward. And that's creating these new alliances. And also with that, supply chain shifts. A fourth structural change is environmental. Natural disasters, warming seas, climate events, the whole global energy transition, all of those things are creating new frictions, but also opportunities for businesses and have implications on consumers and workers. Another one would be, outsized and unsustainable sovereign debt. Now, that's material because sovereign debt, when it's not managed properly, can become inflationary. And because it drives up bond yields, which makes the cost of capital and the cost of borrowing much more expensive, and that stunts growth. And so you have this displacement of private investment for paying old government bills. And then I would say a sixth thing, and there are a ton, but I need to stop at some point, is diversification away from U.S. financial assets and the U.S. dollar as a global currency. Yes, U.S. treasuries are deep, the financial market is liquid, but still in all, many economies, central banks, investors are realizing you can't put all of your eggs in one basket, and they're trying to diversify. And certainly the U.S. needs those investments, but if it can't get it, then we're going to have potentially financial crises linked to sovereign debt and outsized deficits. And so all of these things are massive changes. Some of them you could foresee, like the demographics, and others you couldn't, but are nonetheless happening at the same time.
Dana, that's a fascinating world you painted right there. And I think I have a quick follow-up question to both of you, which is really, given the amount of information that we have access to and that's flowing to directors, what are some of the sources of information, the economic indicators or other data points that you both use in your work to help you navigate this really complex, multifaceted environment we're operating in? And Yolanda, maybe I can turn to you first.
Certainly. I would say for certain, given the environment that we're in, having a data-driven approach to strategy is one of the most important things. Of course, paying attention to your historical trends as well, but looking at forward-looking trends and data-driven approaches to your strategy. Some things are pretty standard. GDP, of course, understanding how the economy is growing and at what rate, unemployment or jobs, understanding if you are a customer-driven industry, understanding how your customer base might be impacted by the economy. In some groups, some companies rather, housing starts would be important. Understanding inflation and interest rates, because all of those have downward channel trends to not only your customers, but to your vendors and suppliers as well. And then, taking that information together with trends internally to understand, as you put together a strategic framework for the company to deliver financial performance, comparative sales, what the trends in sales are, things like operating leverage, of course, margin, internal controls, looking at even your people trends, HR trends. It's often said that your people are the most important asset that companies have. And so understanding how there's growth or HR needs within the company is an important look, understanding the competencies of your team, on and on. So I think the most important takeaway I would say is making sure that you have a well-informed, data-driven approach to strategies so that you can appropriately assess risk and opportunities and manage them along the way in the long term and short term as well.
Dana, let me turn to you. I mean, one of my favorite conference board indicators is consumer confidence. Always want to see that strong. Maybe not the best looking number right now, but are there any other data points, indices, whether conference board or broader, that you think directors should really consider tracking?
Absolutely, including the hard data that Yolanda already mentioned and also the internal metrics. You really need to look at soft data, which is about perceptions. And yes, we specialize in looking at confidence of consumers, businesses, executives, also thinking about risks and tail events. So not only do we have baselines, and companies should have baselines, they should also have bands, right, of what could happen outside of the base case that's material, as well as what are those kind of tail risk events. And we call them gray swans, which are low probability, high impact events that you can identify, as opposed to a black swan, which you cannot. These are things that companies need to think about and gather insights on. And all of these things, both the hard data, the soft data, the internal data, whatever external data you can find about your industry, influence how global financial markets work and how monetary and fiscal policies respond to shocks and gyrations.
Let me stay with you for a moment, Dana, here, because you're talking about some of that forward-looking data that are going to help people, make decisions in the boardroom. And sometimes it can take time to incorporate relevant data into those perspectives to forecast more effectively. I think there's been a lot of times where there have been forecasts for recessions, for example, and it just doesn't come to be. So if we think about some of those broader trends that you talked about earlier and that both of you have been raising for consideration, are there, getting away from the headlines, but really thinking about some of those trend lines, are there some that you think will begin to incorporate into the economic data that directors should really be thinking about now? Or are there other shifts that you think maybe won't necessarily show up in the economic data, but really are relevant to the art that you and your colleagues employ every day when they look out to the future?
Sure. I think all the things that I mentioned, that Yolanda has mentioned, really stack up to two things: structurally higher inflation and consequently structurally higher interest rates. So if you look at everything through those two lenses, that's very helpful for businesses because the cost of capital, cost of labor, all of these things factor into whether or not you can run your business more effectively and grow. Most of the structural changes I mentioned will increase costs before implementation or full implementation, or in some cases, interventions like cutting down sovereign debt can ultimately lower costs. So you have to get from A to B, and to getting from A to B, it costs something. And even the dynamics that can induce or enhance productivity for economies and businesses and workers in the future needs to be invested now. And that, again, costs something. And how these structural changes affect economic actors will influence the response of monetary and fiscal policies. Policymakers are not perfect, and major accelerating changes can lead to policy mistakes. So it's very important for companies to kind of look at all these different disparate measures and look at them through a lens of what this is going to mean for costs that can inhibit growth, and also what it means for gaining access to capital and liquidity.
So Yolanda, to bring you into kind of think about Dana's comments there, we've got these structural changes, interest rates, inflation that Dana just spoke about. There's this sense of uncertainty in the environment, right? Major shifts going on, major world events. So how do you as a director think about your role to help management make trade-offs around capital allocation decisions that give you the protection against that downside risk that we talked about earlier, but also hopefully set you up for success going forward. That's a tough spot to be in.
It is, and I would say, especially in times of economic uncertainty or volatility even, focusing on core becomes important. Ensuring that you are investing in those activities that are going to be valuable in the long term, valuable to you as you think about your North Star as an organization. And so your investments and any returns on those investments should follow that, your core, essentially. So, or, high impact innovation, innovation that's going to return in a time frame that makes the cost of capital investment and investment make sense for the organization. But that is a prioritization process that management takes on. And as a board member, we're there to support those decisions, to bring in our expertise and our experiences in various times of that uncertainty or, a volatility, and lend our expertise to management as they make those decisions about how those investments will be made. But certainly it's the decision-making framework by which an organization approaches those investments. That is the most important thing, because in that framework, you're prepared for addressing risk on any type of investment, or even pull back on certain types of investments. And I would say even stop. So, just because you start an investment doesn't mean that it makes sense to carry that investment through. So that framework is certainly important.
It's one of the great fallacies, right? That the sunk cost fallacy. Dana, to pick up on Yolanda's comments there around those investments, it feels like, and you touched on this earlier, we're at this kind of inflection point for society, but also for business around technology and the opportunities and risks that present there. And so wanted to ask you, from an economist perspective, we hope to see great value creation, great productivity gains. Those things take time to incorporate into the data. We're seeing massive investment on AI and technology now. How do you balance those two out, and how would you encourage directors to think about that, and when perhaps they should realistically start to see those gains, productivity gains or otherwise, start to percolate up in the market and into the data that you and your team lead?
Sure, absolutely. You can see in real time the impacts of investment in technology, certainly in GDP, inflation, labor market measures, but the productivity aspects tend to come later. So I'll just go really quickly through what we can see now and signposts for what you can expect for later. So when it comes to GDP, you're absolutely right. There are massive investments in computer hardware, chips, software, intellectual property generation, which is R&D. Also commodities, and metals and rare earths and critical minerals that go into producing the hardware and the software, as well as chips. And then you also have the structure supporting the next digital age, like data centers. These investments are growing by double digits, as you mentioned, and you can see that in GDP, and also growth in other metrics. When it comes to inflation, you can also see the impacts where this gold rush for better, faster AI does have residual costs, and those costs are associated with accessing natural resources like water and land, energy production to fuel these giant data centers, which serve not only AI, but also blockchain and crypto. And certainly when you look at financial markets, bubble-like asset price valuations. And, a fourth thing regarding that is skilled labor attraction, retention, and upskilling. And certainly when you look at labor market measures, it's about demand and supply. So demand, it's all about hiring and firing with regards to AI. And it's not even across industries. And there's also supply, making sure that the people who are working have the appropriate skill sets and experiences to use AI, as well as the ability to adapt to the new requirements by employers. So, all in all, faster GDP growth and fewer hours to complete tasks do increase productivity in a macroeconomic sense in real time. That's just a formula. However, there's still no perfect set of KPIs or hard data to determine whether AI is having a clear positive impact on individual and business productivity. It's all very subjective right now, making tracking ROI in real time difficult at the base for consumers, workers, and also companies.
And, Yolanda, if I can bring you in here, because that kind of question then where you've got a sort of sentiment out there that we're tracking, but then at times we have seemingly conflicting economic data and other market data. Maybe it's hiring or maybe it's consumer sentiment. The consumer confidence is down, but spending stays up, right? When you sit in I guess this is your job as a director, but how do you make sense of that conflicting data? You talked before about the importance of frameworks and various data inputs, but how do you make sense of this environment? And is some of it just, kind of getting a sense of the wind and making the move?
I think you lean in. You look at your organizations, you get closer to your customers or clients. You understand what's important to them, the voice of the customer. What does service look like? Service changes based on our levels of service, and a customer's expectation on levels of service changes as different factors in the economy changes. And so you have to really lean in and understand the fundamentals. And while you're still going to pay attention to those macroeconomic factors, again, what makes your business run are the customers and or the clients that you serve or the businesses that you serve, and being very in tune to their needs during this inflection period is very important. And I would also say too that, I think I mentioned service, but just leaning in on that point a bit, service can look different, especially as we adopt technology. And so there's a lot of conversation about AI. I think Dana mentioned that when you look at different economic forecasts, AI is the way of the future. But what you're seeing in businesses, brick and mortar and other businesses, is that there's a lot of testing still happening. And so that adoption curve may not be going uphill as quickly as maybe was expected, but we're certainly still in the adoption period, and understanding what that means to, and how that looks and how that feels to your customers, your clients, and the businesses that you serve is going to be extremely important to navigate as we go through this adoption period.
Dana, Yolanda, I've got one last question for you to bring our conversation here to a close. And it's really this: given the environment we talked about, the range of issues, the challenges that boards are facing today with their management teams, is there any advice you have around kind of a mindset shift that directors might take, or other considerations as they're really looking to help their management teams navigate this environment?
Absolutely. I think executives and board members need to understand that they have to expect anything to happen at any time. Within that, also know that you cannot control the issue, but you can manage your response. So there are different ways of doing this. Number one, you can anticipate and prepare for the realization of certain developments. But for developments companies cannot prepare for, board directors must be willing to do three things. Number one, ask the hard questions. Number two, ensure that CEOs and their executive leadership teams are flexible and nimble enough to pivot and work through the challenge. And finally, the third thing is to insist upon accountability, prioritization, clear goals, and strategies to achieve them.
Yolanda, same question to you. Any advice?
I would say that speed and resiliency are the foundational elements of how we approach the boardroom in environments like we're in now, where the economy, there may be some uncertainty, where the economic indicators seem to be very different from, what has been trending over the last, 5-10 years. And so picking up on what Dana said, I absolutely agree. Are the right questions being asked in the boardroom? Have we prepared? Has there been contingency or, other type strategic planning? And if so, what is your speed to action? What does resiliency look like? Because in this environment, we see that things can change sometimes on a daily basis. And so how quickly should you react to a certain indicator? Not everything deserves your micro attention to it. So having a good feel and working with management, how resilient and thorough should your resiliency plan be is, I think, two of the most important things in the boardroom these days.
Well, Dana, Yolanda, really appreciate you taking the time for this conversation today.
Wonderful speaking with you both today.
Thank you.
That concludes this episode of BoardVision. We hope you enjoyed listening. Please subscribe and join us next time. Until then, visit nacdonline.org to stay informed about the latest resources NACD has to offer, such as memberships, certification, national or chapter events, and our content, including reports, articles, and Directorship magazine. That's nacdonline.org. Thank you for listening.